Every type of suspension system explained. Independent suspension. In an independent suspension, each wheel on the same axle can move up and down on its own without affecting the others. This helps the car stay more stable, keeps the tires gripping the road better, and makes the ride smoother. You'll often find this type of suspension in regular cars, especially in the front. Now imagine if all four wheels were connected in a way that made them move together. If one wheel hit a bump or turned sharply, it would shake the others too, making the ride rough and unstable. But with independent suspension, if one wheel hits a bump or goes around a turn, the others stay steady. This gives you better control of the car, especially when turning corners, and makes the ride more comfortable. The main downside of this suspension system is that they are more complicated and expensive to build and repair. One of the most popular types of the independent suspension in modern cars, especially in front-wheel drive vehicles, is the McPherson strut. It's a suspension whose name is taken from its inventor, Ford engineer Earl McPherson. It combines a shock absorber and a coil spring into one single unit. This design helps save space and reduces weight, which is great for compact cars. The McPherson strut is connected directly to the wheel hub, so it takes in the up and down motion caused by bumps in the road. As the wheel moves, the spring compresses, and the shock absorber reduces the bouncing. Lots of cars around the world use McPherson suspension, and many automotive manufacturers like it because of its affordability, ease of obtaining, and fairly simple components. One downside of McPherson suspension is that it can't handle heavy loads very well. Also, when the car turns, the wheel tilts too much, which makes the tires grip the road asphalt less. Another independent suspension system type is the double wishbone suspension, also called an A-arm suspension. It uses two control arms, one at the top and one at the bottom, which is where it derives its name. These arms help keep the wheel standing straight up even as the car goes over bumps or makes turns. This setup gives better grip and handling because it keeps the tires in the right position. It also allows for more precise control of how the wheel moves, including its angle called camber and alignment. That's why double wishbone suspensions are often used in sports cars and luxury vehicles. They offer a smooth ride and great performance. But having more components means more can go wrong. Hence, ball joints, bushings, and arms all require attention over time. Also, if one of the many parts fails, the whole system needs to be serviced or repaired, which tends to take more time and cost than other types of suspension systems. Multi-link suspension. Multi-link suspension, which uses several control arms or links to connect the wheel hub to the car's body, otherwise known as the chassis. This setup gives designers a lot of flexibility to adjust the suspension for both comfort and performance. That's why you'll often find multi-link suspensions in luxury and high-performance cars. Each link in the system is in charge of controlling a certain kind of force, like side-to-side, lateral, or front-to-back, longitudinal movement. Because of this, the system can adjust more precisely to bumps and turns, giving you a smoother ride and better control, no matter what kind of road you're on. Construction of this suspension is made by manipulating the direction of the force that will be received by the wheel. If this suspension is damaged, it can take a long time to fix, and the spare parts are hard to find and cost more than other types of suspension. Torsion beam. A torsion beam suspension is a simple and budget-friendly system that's often used in small cars. It has a solid metal beam that connects the two rear wheels, and this beam can twist slightly to absorb bumps in the road. When one wheel goes over a bump, the beam twists to take in the shock, helping to smooth out the ride. While it doesn't offer as much flexibility or comfort as more advanced suspension systems, it works well for lighter cars that don't need high-performance handling. You can even easily adjust the ride height by tightening or loosening a bolt. However, this suspension system is liable to sag or even snap after extended use. Corrosion is another issue in old models, which can lead to seizing. The good news is that the repairs are always cheap and easy, which is another big advantage. Even though the wheels can move a bit on their own, they're still connected, so a bump on one side affects the other. That's why it's also semi-independent. Performance tuning is also possible with this suspension. Hot hatchbacks like the Fiesta ST and Polo GTI use beefed-up torsion beams with extra tuning to make them handle sharply. Dependent or rigid axle suspension. This type of suspension was widely used before independent suspension was introduced. A dependent suspension system connects the wheels on opposite sides of the vehicle, which means when one wheel moves, like hitting a bump, the other wheel is affected too. This setup is common in trucks, off-road vehicles, and older cars because it's simple, tough, and easy to maintain. These systems are great for heavy-duty use since they can handle rough roads and heavy loads. However, the downside is that they don't offer as much comfort or stability as independent suspension systems. You might feel more bumps, and the ride can be a bit rougher, especially on uneven roads. The unsprung weight is also commonly high because the whole axle moves, which can hurt handling and comfort. As a result, it's not ideal for high-speed cornering or sport driving, but it makes up for it with its off-road driving capability. Even high-performance trucks like the Ford F-250 and Jeep Wrangler stick with dependent suspension because they work so well for their purpose. Coil spring. Coil spring suspension is one of the most common types of dependent suspension used in modern cars. It uses metal springs that are coiled like a spiral to absorb shocks from the road and help keep the car at the right height. When the car hits a bump, the springs squeeze and stretch to soak up the impact. This helps minimize the transfer of vibrations to the vehicle's occupants. They achieve this by providing flexibility that allows them to deform under external stress and return to their original shape once the stress is removed. When compressed, they store mechanical energy, which is released as they expand back to their initial form. The amount of energy stored is directly proportional to the force applied. This process enables coil springs to effectively manage weight and motion in cars. Interestingly, this suspension can be piggybacked with air suspension, which is another form of suspension system. Many modern luxury and SUV suspensions use coil-over-air hybrid setups, where airbags assist or replace coil springs under certain conditions. While coil springs themselves are pretty robust, the components that work with them tend to be the weak links. This can lead to spring sag, rust and corrosion, or shock absorber failure. Leaf spring. Leaf spring is another type of dependent suspension, and it is commonly used in cars in Indonesia, especially in older cars and commercial vehicles. It's usually placed at the back of the car because it is quite stiff. This suspension has a fairly simple construction. It typically includes an axle housing connected to the car frame with U-bolts. They are made up of several layers of leaves, arranged from largest to smallest. The biggest leaf is on top, and each layer is connected to the next. They work by simply bending the metal blades when a force is applied. Metal always wants to go back to its original shape. So when the force goes away, the spring springs back into place, helping to smooth out the ride. These suspensions are usually mounted on the car with one end of it attached to the vehicle frame, while the other end connects to the axle. It typically includes an axle housing connected to the car frame with U-bolts. Leaf springs are the most cost-efficient suspension solutions for commercial vehicles. Cars with this suspension usually have a fairly high level of resistance. However, that doesn't mean they don't come with a few pain points such as axle wrap, spring fatigue, and cracking or breakage. Nevertheless, trucks with leaf springs often feel rough when unladen. They're tuned for weight, not comfort. Air suspension. Now let's talk about something high-tech, and that's the air suspension system. Air suspension replaces regular metal springs with air-filled rubber bags, also called air springs. These bags can be filled or emptied with air, letting the car raise or lower itself. You'll often find air suspension in luxury cars and heavy-duty trucks. An onboard air compressor adds or releases air from the bags, changing the car's height and stiffness based on the road and how the car is being driven. This system is great for comfort, and it can even help with towing or getting over obstacles by adjusting the ride height. However, it can be unreliable if the airbag leaks. It also has more headaches such as compressor failure, valve block malfunctions, sensor issues, and weather sensitivity. Besides all these, one setup can give you a plush ride to the grocery store and stiff, lowered dynamics for the track, all on the same drive. Its kneeling feature allows buses and luxury SUVs lower to help passengers get in or out more easily. Hydraulic suspension. Hydraulic suspension, on the other hand, is like something straight out of a sci-fi movie. It uses fluid-filled parts called actuators to control how high or stiff the vehicle's suspension is. Instead of using air like air suspension, it uses pressurized hydraulic fluid to move the suspension up and down. This system is common in performance cars and custom vehicles like lowriders, where drivers want quick and dramatic changes in ride height. It can respond very fast to road changes, and in some setups, the driver can raise or lower the car with the push of a button. It offers cool effects and sharp performance, but is more complex and expensive than other systems. Hydraulic lines, seals, and connectors are also prone to leaks. Once pressure drops, the suspension may collapse or perform erratically. There's more. Solenoids and control valves can stick or clog, causing inconsistent height adjustments or wheel response. But hydraulics give lowriders their iconic ability to bounce, tilt, or dance, and in military or aviation-grade applications, dual hydraulic circuits ensure the system still works if one fails. Electronic suspension. Electronic suspension systems, also called adaptive or active suspension, are high-tech setups that automatically adjust the vehicle's suspension stiffness and damping in real time. They're mostly used in luxury and performance cars. These systems rely on sensors that monitor road conditions, speed, and driving style. Based on the data, actuators tweak the suspension settings to ensure the ride is smooth, stable, or sporty, depending on the selected mode like comfort, sport, or off-road. Advanced systems like Mercedes' e-active body control can lean the car into corners like a motorcycle to reduce lateral forces on passengers. Systems like Audi's predictive active suspension or Mercedes' magic body control use cameras and radar to scan the road and prepare the suspension in advance for potholes or bumps. Meanwhile, electronically controlled shock absorbers can wear out just like mechanical ones, but are much more expensive to replace. The computer that manages the system may even crash or malfunction, sometimes requiring a software reset or replacement. 3-link rigid suspension. The 3-link rigid suspension is a type of rear suspension often used in off-road and work vehicles. It connects both back wheels with a solid bar, called a rigid or live axle. This suspension has 3 arms, called links, that help hold the axle in place and control how it moves. 2 of the links are at the bottom, 1 on each side, and they help control movement forward and backward. The 3rd link is at the top and helps keep the axle steady up and down and side to side. This type of suspension is good for carrying heavy loads or rough driving and has fewer parts than more complex suspension systems. Though generally robust, the 3-link system isn't bulletproof. The rubber or polyurethane bushings that connect the control arms to the chassis wear out over time, causing clunks, looseness, and poor axle control. Some setups include a panhard rod to control lateral movement. If it fails or its bushings wear out, the axle can shift side to side. Worn bushings, loose bolts, or bent parts can trigger a violent front-end oscillation at speed, commonly known as the dreaded death wobble, especially on lifted vehicles. Nevertheless, many off-roaders love this system because it's highly customizable. You can swap in beefier arms, heim joints, long travel shocks, or a triangulated 4-link to go even harder off-road. Trailing arm. Trailing arm suspension is a type that looks similar to the 3-link rigid suspension, but it works differently. The way it moves is not the same as the 3-link rigid or other types. In this suspension, the arms are connected from one side of the car to the other. It is usually found at the back of the car. Interestingly, trailing arms aren't just for cars. Aircraft landing gear often uses a trailing arm setup for its ability to absorb vertical impacts smoothly. Semi-trailing arm suspensions, like in BMWs of the 70s and 80s, combine longitudinal and transverse motion control, offering better cornering than full trailing arms. But while generally dependable, trailing arm systems can have a few weak points, such as bushings deterioration, limited adjustability, and poor handling at high speeds, especially in old designs. Judging by the features of all the suspensions, it's clear that each type has its own purpose. Some are better for comfort, others for strength, and some for speed. The best one depends on the kind of car and how it's used. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more videos like this. Got a question or favorite type of suspension? Drop it in the comments below. See you next time on Tune My Ride.